Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is L24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Saturday made an unexpected visit to Ukraine, where he held talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Johnson pledged further military and humanitarian support to Ukraine. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan was expelled on Sunday, where he lost a vote of confidence in parliament after being deserted by coalition partners. Voters cast their ballots across France on Sunday in the first round of the presidential election, in which far-right candidate Marine Le Pen is posing an unexpected threat to President Emmanuel Macron's re-election hopes. Zionist security forces raided the Flashpoint West Bank district of Jenin on Saturday, killing a Palestinian and wounding 12 others. Evacuations resumed by road in Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine, where missile strike killed 52 people at a railway station, as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson became the latest Western leader to visit Kiev, and Ukrainians were urged to flee a feared Russian offensive before it was too late. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson made a surprise visit to Kiev as part of solidarity with Ukraine the day after a missile launch that left dozens of dead at the train station in eastern country of Ukraine. Zara Ferjani on what follow.
Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson flew to Kiev on Saturday in a show of support to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, following the UK's pledge to provide more than $130 million in sophisticated weaponry to Ukraine on Friday.
The defense intelligence that we had suggested that the Russians believed that Ukraine could be engulfed in a matter of days and that Kiev would fall in hours to their armies, and how wrong they were.
President Zelensky demanded more pressure on the Russian Federation and an effective help to the Ukrainian people to defend themselves against Russia.
It's time to impose a total embargo on energy growth to increase the supply of all weapons to Ukraine. The people of Ukraine appreciate the UK's support for our path to peace.
As an answer, British Prime Minister pledged tighter sanctions on Russia and offered President Zelensky more defensive arms.
We will continue to intensify week by week the sanctions on Russia, not just freezing assets in banks and sanctioning oligarchs, but moving away from use of Russian hydrocarbons. We will give you the support that you need, the economic support, but also, of course, the defensive military support.
The two leaders meeting in person is the first since the Russian military operation began on February 24th. Zelensky welcomed the UK's decisive and significant support for his country and urged other Western allies to intensify the pressure on Moscow.
Following UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's visit to Ukraine Saturday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called on the other Western democratic states to follow the UK's leader and support his country with the necessary military aid. Zelensky praises British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on his surprise visit to Kiev, who pledged to supply Ukraine with armored vehicles and anti-ship missiles. Austrian Chancellor went on a one-day trip to Ukraine, during which he will visit President Volodymyr Zelensky. Karl Nehammer also visited a mass grave in Bucha, northwest the capital, Kiev, where bodies wearing civilian clothes were found dead after Russian troops' withdrawal. In a televised address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the whole European project as a target for the Russian Federation. He also called for more sanctions to end war in his country.
The task of our anti-war coalition is very clear: to put an end to this war initiated by Russia as soon as possible, to liberate our land from invaders and to guarantee security to Ukraine, and therefore the security of democracy and the freedom of people of Eastern Europe. Because the Russian aggression was not limited and was not aimed only at Ukraine, only the destruction of our freedom and our life. The whole European project is a target for the Russian Federation. Oil embargo should be the first step, and at the level of all democracies, all civilized world. Then Russia will feel it. Then it will be an argument for them to seek peace, to stop unnecessary violence.
Under a broken crescent-shaped hangar at Ghost Mill Airport, the world's largest plane lies folded and broken, an unchanging monument to the battle that Russia waged to gain a foothold in the capital of Kiev. The Antonov and 225 Mriya, a cargo plane with the world's greatest wingspan of 88 meters, has been destroyed by explosions.
It's emotionally difficult, because I was here with my team 2 days before the war started. We were setting up the airport defenses, and maybe we filmed Mriya for the last time. It was intact at that time.
Russia has called on the BRICS group of emerging economies to extend the use of national currencies and integrate payment systems. The finance ministry said that sanctions have cut off Russia from the global financial systems and from nearly half of its gold and foreign exchange reserves, which stood at $6.6 billion in early April. Finance Minister Anton Solenov told ministerial meeting with BRICS, which consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, that the global economic situation had worsened substantially due to sanctions. Finland is getting ready for a historic decision before midsummer on whether to apply for NATO membership as a deterrent against Russia's military operation. Miriam Zian has more to clarify.
Finland is prepared to make a potentially historic decision on whether or not to apply to join NATO before midsummer. The 5.5 million Nordic country has always rejected military alliances, partly to avoid offending its eastern neighbor, with which it shares 1,300-kilometer border. However, following the Russian military intervention, Finland's popular support for joining NATO increased.
So if Finland thinks it's necessary, this influences a lot of people on the Swedish side. And we have seen movement within the Social Democratic Party within the last 2 weeks from a just say no attitude to more pragmatism.
Before it is put to a vote, a government-commissioned national security study will be handed to Parliament next week to assist Finnish MPs in making their own decisions.
I think we will end the discussion before midsummer, so we will have this spring, the early summer, to have the discussions within our parliament. And I think we will have very careful discussions, but we are also not taking any more time than we have to in this process.
Despite the fact that Sweden and Finland are formally non-aligned, they have become NATO partners since the mid-1990s, abandoning their neutrality.
It is for Finland and Sweden to decide whether they want to join NATO, and NATO will respect the decision they take regardless of whether they decide to try to join or not to join.
However, attempting to join NATO would almost certainly be viewed as a provocation by the Kremlin, which has long considered the US-led alliance's expansion on its borders to be a major security concern.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison called the federal election on Sunday, May 21st, launching into the battle to stay in power after a mandate marked by the cessation of natural disasters and the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's have a listen.
Earlier today, I visited His Excellency the Governor-General and advised him to call an election for the House of Representatives and half of the Senate on May 21. And he accepted my advice. But this election and this campaign is incredibly important because there is so much at stake for Australia and our future.
Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan was expelled on Sunday by a motion of censure voted against him on the National Assembly after several weeks of political crisis and the last day under very high tension. No Prime Minister has ever completed his term in Pakistan since the country's independence in 1947, but Imran Khan, in power since 2018, is the first one to fall on the vote of no confidence.
174 members have recorded their votes in favor of the resolution. Consequently, the resolution for vote of no confidence against Mr. Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Islamic Republic of Pakistan, has been passed by a majority of the total membership of the National Assembly.
Iran's foreign ministry published a list of 24 American individuals, including senior U.S. officials, sanctions over their involvement in terrorism activities and violation of human rights. The list primarily takes in people who assisted, impose, and expand pushing U.S. sanctions over Iran during the Trump and Obama administrations. Polls are open in France for a presidential election that has been characterized by demagoguery and lack of political agenda. Emmanuel Macron has fight on his hands from far-right Chancellor Marine Le Pen, who has been roused by a smooth election campaign.
Some 48.7 million voters began voting on Sunday morning in the first round of the presidential election to decide the 12 candidates for the Élysée, including the outgoing Emmanuel Macron and the far-right candidate Marine Le Pen, favorites in the polls. After months of a strange campaign, which makes fear of a strong abstention, the verdict of the ballot box is expected at 8 p.m., with the first estimates on the survey institutes. Until then, the cameras will capture the candidates' votes in their respective fiefdoms. In the silence to which the law has imposed them since Friday evening, most will do their public duty early in the morning before returning to their field headquarters in Paris.
I think this is an important election for this country. A transition phase. There are a lot of expectations, so even if we live abroad, it's important to represent our rights. It's essential. It's a citizen's act. I would never fail in this obligation. It's an obligation for me.
Centrist incumbent Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen are the favorites to qualify in the second round on April 24th. With Jean-Luc Mélenchon in ambush in the role of the third man. The last surveys published in the week promised between 25 and 28% of the votes to Emmanuel Macron, 21.5 to 24% to Marine Le Pen, and 16 to 18% to Jean-Luc Mélenchon. The latter two have been in continuous progression at the end of the campaign.
A human rights monitoring group said that Zionist entities have launched an aerial aggression from the direction of the north of Lebanon that targeted some locations in the central region. The London-based so-called Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is close to the Syrian opposition, said that the explosions were heard in the town of Masyaf and nearby areas in the west of government-controlled Hama province. It said that strikes were the eighth by the Zionist regime against Syria so far this year. The Zionist occupier launched a raid on Saturday morning in the Palestinian camp of Jenin. Palestinian officials said that 25-year-old Palestinian Ahmed al-Said died during the clashes on Saturday. A compact crowd carried his remains on a structure covered with an Islamic Jihad flag at his funeral. The Palestinian Red Crescent also reported 12 Palestinians wounded, several of them by the gunshot during the Zionist occupier assault. According to the government and the United Nations, more than 7.7 million South Sudanese, or around 63% of the population, are suffering a food crisis as the country's conflict escalates. The figure represents an increase of 7% over the previous year's figure. Report says the climate shock, such as floods and droughts, as well as population displacements, are leading to growing food insecurity, as well as continued armed hostilities. The Peruvian Congress asked President Pedro Castillo to step down Saturday after an anti-government protest have continued since March 30. In a vote held in Congress of the Republican upon the motion of the right parties, Castillo was advised to resign. More over this Peruvian issue in this report by Islam Seed.
In a vote held in the Peruvian Congress upon the motion of the right parties, Pedro Castillo was advised to step down after anti-government protests have erupted since March.
The president has to leave power because this is too much corruption. He is not competent and he will lead us to ruin.
Hundreds of Peruvians demonstrated on Saturday in Lima at the call of political and civil organizations to demand the resignation of the radical left President Pedro Castillo because of an increase in fuel and food prices.
I come to this demonstration, to this mobilization, because this government leads us to a catastrophe. It leads us to misfortune, to an economic collapse. All commodities have increased.
Reports said the number of people killed increased to 6 and the injured jumped to 20 in the violent protests. According to the Interior Ministry, 25 people officers were injured during the clashes.
We need him to get out of government. People who really love their country to get out and come help Peru move forward.
Castillo stated on Tuesday that a curfew he had imposed in Lima and Callao just hours before had been lifted in order to contain the protests.
Thousands of Sri Lankans rallied in the capital Colombo to demand President Gotabaya's resignation, claiming that neither he nor members of his family could be trusted to lead the country out of its increasing economic crisis. Sri Lanka is in the midst of its worst financial crisis since independence, with food, fuel, medicine, and electricity becoming increasingly scarce. On Saturday, students, teachers, lawyers, actors, and architects chanted "Madman Gota" and "Go Home Gota," referring to the president's nickname. Tunisian President Kais Saied, facing political and economic crisis and accusations, announced compensation on Sunday for the families of those killed and wounded in 2011, a revolution that brought democracy to the country. Saied last month dissolved parliament, imposing one-man rule after governing by decree since the summer. He has said that he was trying to save the North African country from collapse. The leader of the regime in power in Guinea, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, gave foreign mining companies a deadline to build factories on the spot to share fairly with the country the incomes from its resources. The deadline is until the end of May to submit proposals and schedule for construction of bauxite refineries, according to the Guinean leader.
I ask you to come back to the Minister of Mines and Geology with proposals, a project, precise schedule for construction of alumina refineries in the Republic of Guinea. The government will not hesitate to take its responsibilities to restore balance. The transformation of bauxite into alumina must be limited to the establishment of refinery plants. All raw materials and products used in processing must be produced on site.
3 rich businessmen and their astronaut escort have arrived in space at the International Space Station, where they will remain for more than a week after blasting out on a SpaceX rocket on Friday, after 2 years of transporting personnel to the orbiting lab for NASA. The U.S. space agency NASA has joined Russia in entertaining visitors at the world's most costly tourist attraction. The businessmen are paying 50 million euros each for the rocket's ride and are conducting full experiments during their stay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder for our main news stories. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on Saturday made an unannounced visit to Ukraine, where he held talks with President Volodymyr Zelensky. Johnson pledged further military and humanitarian support to Ukraine. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan was expelled on Sunday when he lost a vote of confidence in parliament after being deserted by coalition partners. Voters cast their ballots across France on Sunday in the first round of presidential election in which far-right candidate Marine Le Pen is posing an unexpected threat to President Emmanuel Macron's re-election hopes. Zionist security forces raided the Flashpoint West Bank district of Jenin on Saturday, killing a Palestinian and wounding 12 others. That's all the news we have got so far for now. Take care of yourself and bye-bye.